Good evening and welcome to CYC News for today, the 22nd of September 2013 and the 12th of Tut 1730 AD. I'm Christina Maurice.
And I'm Joseph Farmy. In today's headlines, Islamists claim gun attack on Nairobi Mall where at least 39 have died. Syria chemical weapons data received by the Organisation of Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. 4 dead in the latest Chicago shootings and 13 wounded at a park. Iraq bombings target Baghdad funeral, which kill at least 65 people. And Japan leads with breaking research in Alzheimer's disease.
And to our top story tonight, gunmen stormed a shopping mall in Kenyan capital Nairobi on Saturday, killing at least 39 people, including close relatives of Kenya's president and children, in an attack claimed by the Somali Islamist group Al-Shabaab. Shooting continued hours after the initial assault as troops surrounded the Westgate Mall and police and soldiers combed the building, hunting the attackers shop by shop. A police officer inside the building said the gunmen were barricaded inside a Nakumatt supermarket, one of Kenya's biggest chains. "We got 3 bodies from this shop," said a 64-year-old volunteer, Vipul Shah, standing a dozen metres from the supermarket entrance and pointing to a children's shoe shop where blood lay in pools. "And a couple of bodies here," said Shah, as he turned to a nearby burger bar where piped music still played and food lay abandoned.
The attack appeared designed to achieve maximum global impact by targeting a place frequented by Westerners as well as Kenyans. France confirmed 2 of its citizens were amongst the dead. The US State Department said it had reports that American citizens had been injured, and Britain said its nationals had undoubtedly been affected. Al-Shabaab, which has links to Al-Qaeda, is battling Kenyan and other African peacekeepers in Somalia. Al-Shabaab had repeatedly threatened attacks on Kenyan soil if Nairobi did not pull its troops out of the Horn of Africa.
The International Chemical Weapons Watchdog says it has received the expected account by Syria of its chemical arms program. The announcement by the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, or OPCW, comes before a deadline set for Damascus as part of a Russia-US deal. Syria is believed to have about 1,000 tonnes of chemical toxins. Its entire chemical weapons arsenal has plans to be dismantled by the middle of next year, under the terms of the deal. We can confirm that we have received the expected disclosure from the Syrian government regarding its chemical weapons program, the OPCW said. On Monday, the UN confirmed in a report that the nerve agent sarin had been used in an attack in the Ghouta district of the capital Damascus on 21st of August, killing hundreds of people.
The report did not apportion blame, but the US, UK and France have accused Syrian government forces of carrying out the attack, and the US has threatened military action. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has blamed rebel groups. Syria's ally Russia said it had serious grounds to believe the attack had been a provocation by rebels. More than 100,000 people have died since the uprising against Bashar al-Assad began in 2011. Millions of Syrians have fled the country, mostly to neighbouring nations, and millions more have been internally displaced.
Police have confirmed a series of gun attacks overnight in Chicago, leaving 4 men dead following a shooting at a Southside park that also wounded 13 people this week. The latest violence comes as the city struggled to respond to impulsive and reckless street violence. Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel returned home from Washington after cancelling meetings there and spoke at a prayer vigil on Friday night, where he urged witnesses to Thursday's park shooting to come forward. Chicago has one of the worst homicide rates in the country, with more violent crime than such places as New York and Los Angeles. The city's police department had been claiming success in stemming the violence with the strategy of flooding 20 high-crime neighbourhoods with officers. The victims range in age from 18 to 37. 3 of the attacks occurred in the city's largely poor South Side, where Thursday night's shootings by suspected gang members carrying an assault weapons took place.
At least 65 people have been killed in multiple bombings that targeted a tent filled with mourners in Baghdad's Shiite stronghold of Sadr City, according to police and medical officials. A bomb went off near the tent where a funeral was being held. while a suicide bomber driving a car then blew himself up. A third explosion followed as police, ambulances and firefighters were gathering at the scene, police said. No group immediately claimed responsibility for the attack, in which at least 120 others were wounded, according to medics. Investigations are still being carried out.
Police are appealing for help to find 4 people involved in an acid attack on a motorbike rider in Australia's state of Victoria. The 62-year-old man was riding along the South Gippsland Highway to Melbourne yesterday when he was flagged down, pushed down an embankment and had acid thrown in his face. He suffered serious burns to his face and body, and his attackers shouted that they didn't like bikies, but police say the victim is not associated with any outlaw motorcycle groups. Detective Acting Sergeant Peter Johnston says he thinks it was a random attack and says police are scoring CCTV for the attacker's car, a small dark green 4-door sedan. Police are hoping to speak to the victim to clarify further details.
California's first regulations on fracking and related oil production practices will go into effect next year in the most populous US state under a bill signed into law on Friday by Democratic Governor Jerry Brown. Hydraulic fracturing is the practice of injecting water, sand and chemicals underground to crack rock formations and free up oil and natural gas. The technology makes it possible for oil companies to unlock California's vast Monterey Shale deposit, estimated to hold 15.4 billion barrels of recoverable oil. But environmentalists across the nation have condemned the practice, saying that the chemicals used in the process pollute underground water supplies and cause other damage. New York has instituted a suspension on fracking, and Illinois Governor Pat Quinn signed a strict set of regulations into law in June. The California law would require oil companies to obtain permits for fracking, as well as acidizing the use of hydrofluoric acid and other chemicals to dissolve shale rock.
Germany's rival parties have concluded their final day of campaigning ahead of Sunday's parliamentary elections. Polls suggest Chancellor Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats will win the biggest share of the vote. But her current coalition partners, the Free Democrats, may not pass the 5% threshold for winning seats in Parliament. If so, Mrs. Merkel may have to consider a coalition with her main rival, Peer Steinbrück's Social Democrats Party, the SDP. On Saturday, Mrs. Merkel held a large rally in Stralsund and Mr. Steinbrück appeared at an event in Frankfurt. Polling stations are due to open at 8 a.m. local time and close at 8 p.m. Addressing a Christian Democratic Union rally in Hanover on Friday, Mrs. Merkel asked for votes to continue with her government's policies into 2017. Peer Steinbrück, whose opposed SDP party is trying to deny Mrs. Merkel a third term, rallied his supporters in the town of Kassel on Thursday. Mr. Steinbrück has sharpened his attacks on his rival, accusing her of skirting the country's big challenges.
Police at Paris's Charles de Gaulle Airport have seized 1.3 tonnes of pure cocaine on board an Air France flight from Venezuela, according to French officials. The drugs were found packed inside 30 suitcases on the 11th of September, but the operation was revealed on Saturday. France's Interior Minister, Manuel Valls, said it was the biggest drug haul ever made in the Paris area. 6 people were arrested, accused of being members of an international drug smuggling ring, Mr. Valls said. Officials say they believe the drugs were meant for sale in France and had a street value of 200 million euros, which is an equivalent of an estimated 270 million US dollars. The Air France flight came from Caracas. The suitcases with cocaine reportedly were not registered to any of the passengers.
BlackBerry has announced its plan to cut 4,500 jobs, which is 40% of its worldwide workforce, in an attempt to curb huge losses. The smartphone maker said it anticipated a loss of as much as 995 million US dollars when it reports its second quarter earnings next week. Shares in the firm closed down 17% after briefly being halted following the announcement. In August, the Canadian company said it was evaluating a possible sale. In a statement on Friday, BlackBerry Chief Executive Thorstein Heinz said, "We are implementing the difficult but necessary operational changes announced today to address our position in a maturing and more competitive industry and to drive the company toward profitability. Further adding that, going forward, they plan to refocus their offering on their end-to-end solution of hardware, software and services for enterprises and the productive professional end user.
And to health news now, where the number of older people needing care is set to nearly triple globally by 2050, campaigners say. Currently, 101 million people require care, but a report from Alzheimer's Disease International warns the figure will rise to 277 million. Many needing care have dementia, and the report warns there will be a global Alzheimer's epidemic. The report's author said that countries like India and China would be hard hit and must start planning services now. Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia. Symptoms include loss of memory, mood changes, and problems with communicating and reasoning. More than 35 million people live with dementia across the world, according to the World Health Organization. More than half are living in low and middle income countries. The report reveals that as the world population ages, the traditional system of informal care by family, friends and the community will need much greater support.
Japanese scientists have developed pioneering brain imaging that can detect the buildup of destructive proteins linked to Alzheimer's. It could lead to new ways of diagnosing the condition and of testing the effectiveness of new drugs. The technology is reported in the journal Neuron and can detect tau proteins, which are found inside living brain clumps. Tau is very closely linked to the disease, with tangles of tau thought to be one way in which brain cells are killed. The team, led by the National Institute of Radiological Sciences in Chiba, used positron emission tomography to build a 3D picture of tau in the brain. Alzheimer's Research UK is optimistic about these findings. Alzheimer's disease is a problem for researchers trying to come up with a cure. The brain starts to die years before any symptoms are detected, which means drugs are probably given too late. A diagnosis of Alzheimer's cannot be made with absolute certainty until a patient has died and their brain is examined. It is also not 100% clear what is the cause of the dementia and what is purely symptomatic.
And that's all for CYC News today. Stay tuned for more Christian content on CYC. I'm Joseph Farmy.
And I'm Christina Maurice. From the CYC studios in Sydney, Australia, good night and God bless.